one of the things that makes me not think too much about the module and too much about grounds and connections is, I got to say, this is our input to create the DREF, and this is our DREF output. Now, we do have a variance in the pulse width, but we certainly have a reasonably clean waveform here. So it leads me away from the idea of it being a ground or some sort of a problem with the information making its way where it belongs. So this technician took a look at that waveform, and when he zoomed in on it, something struck him as familiar. And let me clear all my scribble off of here. And let's see. All right, I want to point something out to you. We have a narrow pulse, a wider pulse, and a wider pulse. And that pattern starts again. This is very deliberate looking. And the technician thought about this for a minute, and he thought it looked kind of familiar. So, based on his experience with General Motors and these ignition systems, he has a hunch. So obviously I don't have an exact way to get where this guy got to, but clearly, if everyone on this call, other than the guys that admit that they're new guys, have had training on these ignition systems, and this kind of a pattern should be fairly familiar. So this engine in this particular car is a 3.8 VIN 3. So the technician decides he's going to consult his service information and look and see if he can find information about the balancer. And he does. And when he sees this picture, he sees a balancer that has three spaces between the blades that appear to be the same. So he thinks that this balancer should produce a 50% duty cycle. And then he remembers that this thing could have a VIN C engine. And the VIN C balancer, when he gets a picture of it, looks different. In fact, when he looks at the service information for VIN C, he sees that the balancer has a narrow, wider, and wider gap. He sees that in the illustration here, okay? And now the familiarity in the waveform starts to make sense to him. So is it possible that somebody stuck a VIN C balancer on the car with a VIN 3 crank sensor? Well, apparently it is possible, because this magnet on a VIN 3 is actually going to be right here. And the sensor is going to be on the outside. So let me see. Maybe I got that wrong. The sensor actually will be in the middle and the magnet will be on the inside. Excuse me. However, believe it or not, this could be done. The wrong balancer can be installed on this car, and the crank sensor will live with it. So here we have a picture of the proper balancer for this vehicle, and on the right-hand side we have the balancer that the guy took off the car. And if someone hadn't spotted this right away, you shouldn't feel bad, because that part had a life somewhere else before it got onto this car. So instead of being bright and shiny and obvious to the technician, a used part was installed, and the technician has to figure it out on his own. There is the 3 different size windows right here. And what I'm saying is that the crank sensor can actually fit in between here and pick up that signal. Now, with the new balancer installed, everybody looks happy. Our DREF has got a 50% duty cycle, and that's coming from our 3X signal, which is also a 50% duty cycle, and the ignition system is now triggering properly. Zooming in, we can see our primary current reflects a very consistent dwell. And finally, we take a look at the starter current and the ignition sync, and we see that the ignition is synchronized right at the peak of the peak current for the starter motor. Well, we also see something else. It's kind of bad news, and that is we obviously that cranking this engine at 600 amps has taken its toll on that starter motor, and the customer is going to need one of these, lest that one day the starter motor stops right on top of that commutator bar and the engine won't crank. So it's going to take more than just the harmonic balancer to fix this car.